Hey folks, welcome back to the farm. Our last video generated some questions about the chicken coop. People are wondering the cost and the dimensions and stuff like that. One of our subscribers, in particular, One Bright Light, wanted to get some of that info. So we're going to do a video on some of that. And we'll also do a video on the construction of it. So you can go step by step with us and figure out what construction entails. Don't be afraid of it by any means. Once you have the information, it's not hard to do. It doesn't take a lot of fancy tools. And you can do more than what you actually think you can do. So let's talk a little bit about the pricing first before we get outside and start going over the step-by-step process. So far, we've got the concrete poured and making the concrete forms. We had already had some older wood that we used for that, so we didn't have to purchase that. And I recommend that you repurpose wood whenever you can, because that's going to save you money. If somebody's got an old shed they want torn down or something like that, go do it and reclaim all of that wood. Sometimes the siding's toast, but the structural lumber will be just fine. Get that stuff. Free 99, like I said, is the best price. So we had the form wood already. We had some wire that we used for the concrete reinforcement. It was some old wire shelving that we had found on Facebook Marketplace when we did the greenhouse. But we had some of that had no frames around it. It was just a wire mesh. And it's heavy gauge wire, so we used that. So we got that pretty much free. And the concrete itself is about the only cost we incurred on the slab. And where we live, it's $109 a yard for the type of concrete that we use. There's different types of concrete, but just for a regular old chicken coop, you don't need to buy the expensive stuff. You can buy the cheaper concrete. And $109 a yard, so we needed 2 yards for that project, but we poured the grain bin floor, the Benzebo, if you will, at the same time. So we ordered up 4 yards of concrete because we needed 4 yards, 2 yards for each project. So we got by the short fill fee on the truck, because anything 2 yards or below, they charge a short fill fee. So we got beyond that. But because we lived as far out of town as we did, they charged us a travel fee, which ended up to be about $30. So just for this one project, I won't tell you the price for the whole project when we did both, but for the chicken coop, you figure $109 per yard. We had 2 yards, and plus that travel fee. So that's what you're going to pay for concrete, and that's what almost $150 just for the concrete. So there's your cost there. So what we've purchased so far for the chicken coop is pretty much all the framing lumber, the ceiling joists, the rafters, and the ridge beam for the rafters, and all of the siding, and 2 of the windows. Remember, we got 2 windows when we were on Junk Jaunt. We got 2 windows for $4. Again, go to these places and start collecting this stuff early, and you can get it a lot cheaper. If you're planning ahead, you can find this stuff. Go to your Habitat for Humanity surplus stores. You can get stuff dirt cheap. You can get wiring, you can get doors, windows, whatever. Doesn't have to be all the same size, doesn't have to be all the same color. Just get this stuff, especially if it's for a chicken coop. So for that stuff that we've purchased basically everything but the roofing. And we're at about $1,300 in materials for that. And with lumber prices the way they are, back in the day, we would have probably been maybe $700 into it. But because of the elevated lumber prices right now is why we're at about $1,300. But again, go find those those buildings that you can tear down, and start accumulating lumber ahead of time. You can find it piece by piece here and there. You don't have to find a whole bundle of it. Just start accumulating it and stack it flat somewhere so it doesn't start twisting on you. You can cut it to whatever length you want, so don't worry about buying stud length or whatever. You can cut stuff down, you can rip stuff down, you can make a 2x6, a 2x4 if you got a table saw, or even a skill saw would work if you snap a line on it or run a ruler down it. So I highly recommend you accumulate this stuff ahead of time. You can do it much cheaper. So when you get to the roofing, you got to factor in some different things. So some people are going to say the metal roof that we're going to go with is more expensive than like a composite shingle roof. But you have to figure on a composite shingle roof, that whole roof is going to have sheeting on it. Whereas when you do the metal roofing, you don't have to sheet the whole roof. You can use just purlins to screw the metal sheets down to. And purlins are a lot cheaper, I think, than sheeting the full thing. So factor in all those costs and decide what you want. We want a more permanent roof on it, so that's why we're going with metal. We don't want to be replacing composition shingles in 10 years when the wind blows them off, because we get high winds out here. So that's where we're at without the roof metal. So when we buy the roof metal, we'll update you on what that costs and what all we had to buy for that. So if you got any more questions on, what we purchased and when or whatever, you can see that as we go along, but if you throw a question in the comment section or whatever, I'll answer it as best as I can. So we're going to go outside, and we're going to, in this first part of the video, show you the layout of the concrete slab. And then after that, we're going to do these videos piece by piece, so it's not too much all in one video. We don't want to make hour-long videos. So as we go along, we'll do a video as we go. So today we're going to handle concrete. We'll probably do some other work today, but you're not going to see it on this video. We'll save that for following video. So again, questions or comments? If you like this content, give us a like, thumbs up, and comment. We don't do this for money, but it does help us get to more people if you do that, so we appreciate that. So let's go out and talk concrete. So our concrete slab. Let's start with dimensions. This chicken coop is going to be overall 8 foot wide by 16 feet long. Now, when you figure out your dimensions, make sure you check your building codes for your area. Normally, you're allowed up to a certain size building before you need a builder's permit. So we're within that, within our area. We can build this building without a permit. Sometimes they go by the square footage of the floor. Sometimes they go by the square footage of the roof. So make sure you check that stuff. So to make your 8 by 16 slab, you're going to do your form work. And remember, we had this wood from other stuff that we reclaimed. So we didn't have to go buy it. It was 2 by 6, and I ripped it down on the table saw at 2 by 4 because that's how thick our concrete is going to be. We made sure that the dirt slab here that we had before we started building was fairly level, and we did some fine-tune leveling after we made the forms. So let's talk forms. So remember, your forms aren't going to be the same as your measurements you want of your concrete. Only 2 sides will be. So these ends, because they overlap the forms on the sides, are going to have to be a little bit longer than 8 feet, because we have 1.5 inches on either side to allow for those side forms. So we had to add 3 inches to this end form here. So this end form is 8 foot 3 inches long to allow for that. So we cut 2 of those, 8 foot 3 inches long exactly, one for this end, one for that end. Now these side forms, because they're on the inside of the other board, they're going to be the same dimension as our concrete slab, which is 16 feet. Now, if you're buying wood for your forms, this is the wall you want to make full length, because you don't want to have to buy an 18-footer to make a 16-foot plate or a form here. So make this your long wall, 16 feet, and then the end wall here, if you're doing an 8-foot, you can use a standard, well, you can't use a standard 8-footer because you got to be a little bit long. But this board's going to be a lot cheaper to buy, say 10 feet long, than this one would be to buy 18 feet long. So think about that. So that's how you size your forms, to get an inside measurement. So the inside of your form will be 16 feet long by 8 feet wide exactly. So once you get those 4 boards cut, screw them together on the corners. Make sure you got the right one inside and outside. And then you have your big rectangular box. So you'll start on one end once you have your big rectangular box, and you're going to put it along as level as you have. I got a big 6-foot level that we put on here. And then we drive our stakes and level this board. Now, you've got to think about placement of the slab. So what we did, we have the existing shop here. We measured over the distance we wanted to be from the shop and made that board that distance all the way across. So we started there. So once we got that, we knew where that board was going to go. We leveled this board from end to end. Obviously, we didn't dig down. We just lifted up the end that needed to be lifted, and we started driving stakes. So we drove a stake on either corner, and then we put a string from corner to corner. We stretched it tight, and then we tied it off to where it was on the outside corner. So that showed us this board here, whether it had any waves in it. So wherever we were going to drive a stake, we made sure we pulled that board over right to the string, and then that's where it goes. So we'd make sure it's level, pull it over where it needed to be, drive the stake, move it up and down, whatever you had to do before you drive that nail in. Make sure you're using duplex nails. They're 2-headed nails. So you drive it in to one head sticks out, the inner head's up against the wood, and that allows you to pull those nails out when you take the form down. So you've got this side the same distance from the shop, you've got it level, and you've got it straight. So now you're good. So now you take a tape measure, you go corner to corner, and this corner to that corner over there, and you make sure it comes out the same measurement. If not, you move this end, both ends will move at the same time, to where you're square. Once you have the same measurement, you're exactly square. So then you'll drive a stake down here on this end, and then do the same thing with a string if you have to get this form straight here. I laid a string on there, it was already straight because it's so short, it was already nice and straight. But check it anyway. So then you start from this corner and you make sure it's level out to that other edge. Drive a stake, drive a nail, make sure it's straight. And then you work your way around. So you've got 2 sides level now. So then put your level here, make sure your board is straight, start driving your stakes, move them up and down on the stake until it's level, drive your nail in, so on and so on all the way around. So when you're done, you've got stakes all the way around holding it, everything's square, everything's straight, and you're exactly 8 foot by 16 foot on the inside of the form. Now the other thing I do is when I drive my stakes, I cut my stakes off flush with the top of the form. That way when you do your screed board, which is the board you use as you're pouring concrete to make sure your concrete's level all the way across as you go, you're not hitting these stakes and having to go around them. You can just do a nice straight pull across. And obviously your screed board's going to have to be a little bit wider, so it's going to have to be a little longer than 8 feet to get that done. Now we didn't do a real crazy good finish on this slab because we had 2 slabs to do. Remember, we did this one and we did the grain bin at the same time. So we poured this one first, we screeded it off real nice, and then we left it because we wanted to get over there and finish that one. So you can see this didn't get troweled out or anything like that, it just got a flat finish. Now the sideboards that we used, because these were reclaimed boards, we didn't have full 16-foot boards. So we did a splice. Make sure your splice goes far enough on either side to where it keeps everything nice and straight. But before you nail it, you can pull it up or do whatever you need to do to get it, straight and level. But that's what we did. You can see the finish isn't perfect, but it's fine for a chicken coop. We did go around the outside with the edge tool, so we got a rounded edge. We had time to do that. But that was about it, and that's all it needs. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're not building the clock here. Now, talk about anchoring to the concrete. They do make anchor bolts. They're kind of like got a hook on the end of it, or they're bent on the end, and you can put those right in the concrete as you pour, and make sure they're sticking up the right length, so you have enough threads to screw down and tighten down to the wood. Some people will put those too tall and they'll run out of threads before it tightens down, so you got to watch that. Some people carry a little 2x4 around with them and just make sure it's in the right spot. But if you do that, if you use those concrete anchors that go into the wet concrete, you're going to have to come out here and basically figure out where your layout is for all your studs. So you make sure you're not putting one where a stud goes. So that's kind of a headache, but it can be done. You can make marks on the outside of your form where you want your bolts to go. But I chose not to do that. What we're going to come through is we're going to do the drill in anchors, and then you drive them in, they tighten up. So anywhere where there was a corner, when we did our framing, we made sure we left enough room to get an anchor, so we could get a drill in here and drill the hole, slide the anchor into the hole, and then you tighten the nut, and as you tighten the nut, it comes up and it anchors, and I'll show you one of those bolts. But now, instead of worrying about where all the studs are, I can just go in here and drop one in here, drop one in over there, come over and drop one on either side of the wall here, and so on and so on. And I got room for those. Now, you don't have to use those anchors that you drill the holes and they wedge themselves in. They have some really cool epoxy now that you still got to drill the hole, but it's a really hard setting, super durable epoxy apparently, and you squirt the epoxy down in that hole, shove your anchor down in there and let it cure for a day or so, I'm sure. It probably hardens pretty darn quick, and then you tighten up your bolt and it's anchored. But I don't know how that would have worked out here with all the freezing weather that we got and stuff. I'm sure they've probably thought about that and it probably works fine. But we bought the wedge anchors, so let me show you one of those. All right, here's our expanding type concrete anchors. Here's two different brands, two different versions of them. This one has like a full sleeve, and then the edges are cut, and this end of the bolt section is tapered. So as you drill I think this is a 1/2 inch, you would drill a 1/2 inch hole down into the concrete. You'd shove this down through the board into the concrete. This one's probably not long enough for our application, but this one here would be. But you shove it down in there, and then as you tighten this bolt, this will come up and wedge these things out, and it'll wedge itself into the concrete, and then you tighten it down till it locks down tight on your wood. This one here doesn't have a sleeve. All it has is this little collar, but it's the same principle. It's got a wedge down here. This collar wedges into the concrete on this little nipple here and stays in place. And then as this tightens up and goes in, it wedges tighter and tighter in place. This one doesn't come with lock washers or anything, but if you buy this type, I recommend that you get the flat washer and the lock washer to go with it. I think this is like a 7/16 or something like that. But it'll tell you which concrete masonry bit you got to buy. And I drill right down through the wood into the concrete and everything. Make sure the holes blowed out a little bit so your wedge goes all the way in. If it doesn't go all the way in, drill your hole a little deeper. Make sure it goes all the way in. I usually screw these nuts out to protect the threads on the bolt. So that way if I hammer on here a little bit to tap it in, it's not hurting the top of the bolt at all. But some people say to move it down like this to where you're not hurting the nut. You're just hitting the top of the bolt. So Might be a better idea to do that. But that's how you anchor it down. I would put one like this wall here. I'd put one in a corner and probably one either in the middle here or one here and one there, because you're going to have some cripple studs come in here later. But you see down there on the plate we have a mark, so you know where you got to put it to miss those cripple studs. Now, if you don't want to do concrete anchors or the wet concrete anchors, there is another option. They have what's called a Hilti gun, and anybody at your hardware store will know what that is. Some hardware stores will even rent those out. But it's like a concrete nail that you put in a gun that uses a blank cartridge similar to a gun, like a regular rifle or pistol. It'll use like a blank cartridge, and it fires that nail down through the wood and into the concrete and anchors that down into the concrete. So that's another option too, if you can find a Hilti gun that you can use, or maybe one of your friends has one. If you know a friend that does projects like this on a regular basis, sometimes they'll have a Hilti gun. There's a couple different versions of them. Some of them look like a gun, you pull the trigger type thing. The other ones will have a little charge and you like hit the top of it with a hammer to set it off. It'll have like a little handle, like a big chisel or something. And you'll load the nail. Sometimes you'll drive the nail down actually into the wood and then put that unit over the top. Make sure there's a cartridge in there and you hit it with a hammer and boom, it goes down in the concrete. So let's talk concrete reinforcement. We had bought some of these wire panels that I told you about. A lot of them had frames around them, different sizes, but a bunch of them did not have frames around them. It was just the wire itself. So we had a whole bunch of those panels. We got them dirt cheap. So we use those for the reinforcement in the concrete. The other thing I liked about those wire panels is they're already flat and you don't have to monkey with them. Some of that concrete reinforcement wire you get comes in a roll, and you got to get it rolled out and you got to get it to stay flat, which is kind of a bear sometimes. You've got to kind of back bend it over in reverse of what it's already bent to get it to lay down. So those are good for tomato cages, but they're kind of a pain in the butt for laying concrete. So before you lay your reinforcement wire in, or your panels or whatever you're using, you want to make sure you got a pretty good level grade. So when you figure how much concrete you need, you don't wind up short. So what we did is we cut a board that was just inside of the form, just a hair under 8 feet long, where it wouldn't wedge in there and we could move it freely. And we went down the length of the slab, holding that board flush with the top of the form. You could even screw a little short board on either end just to keep it on top of the form so you don't have to hold it. And we just moved that down the form, one end to the other, so we could see where the grade of the dirt was, where the slab was going. And if we had something that was crazy deep, like a hole or something, we put some fill dirt in there. We packed it down real good with a packer, and I'll show you what a packer looks like. And we did that all the way across, so we knew we were pretty much 3.5 inches deep all the way across. And when you figure your concrete, that'll be really good. You'll be right on the money. You know you're not going to run short of concrete. So let me show you what one of those tampers looks like. So this is a tamper, or a soil compactor, whatever you want to call it. It's an 8x8. They make them up to 12x12, I think. It's got a real heavy cast iron base on it and a handle. So anywhere you got loose dirt, make sure it's kind of moist and not just dry, because you can't compact dry soil. And then you take this and you just go down the line and just tamp your soil down. It's very good if you're laying brick or something like that. If you've got the underlayment underneath the brick, whether it be sand or whatever, moisten it up and then go through and tamp it, make it all nice and hard so you don't have settling later. Now when you're figuring out how much concrete you need, because it's so expensive, you want to get as close as you can. Go online, do a Google search for concrete calculator, and find one where you just put in the dimensions of the slab, whether it be square, rectangle, or round, and you'll put in the outside dimension and you'll put in the thickness of your slab, and it'll tell you how many yards you need. So say it says you need 1.8 yards. Well, I would get 2 yards. But if you do like I said, and make sure you run across there and measure your grade after you get your form set up, you can get pretty darn close. So just make sure you're not under, because if you're under, you're going to be scrambling. So if you have a store that'll take back bags of concrete after you buy them, go get a couple bags of concrete just for safety, just so you can mix up a little bit if you need to fill in a little hole or something. But if you don't use it, take it back. But you can get pretty darn close. Now, my supplier said he could get down to a 1/4 yard. So if you're just over 2 yards or whatever, order a 1/4 yard more or a 1/2 yard, whatever. But increments of a 1/4, he said he could do. So you have a little leeway back and forth. Now, some people will even lay down plastic for a moisture barrier to keep the moisture from the ground from wicking up into the concrete, which it will do. But this is a chicken coop, and we're not going to worry about that. So we laid the panels in there. We overlapped them where we needed to overlap them, so we had 100% coverage. And then we had a bunch of broken pieces of this old red brick that was under the grain bin. So we used those pieces. They were about 1 inch thick, and we put them all over underneath the wire panels to hold the panels that far up off the ground. If you've ever poured concrete, it's the hardest thing is to get the reinforcement material up into the concrete. A lot of times it's just laying on the ground, which, that'll keep a slab from settling in one area more than the other, but it's not going to keep it from cracking. So you want the wire up into the concrete if you can. Now, if you go to Lowe's or Home Depot or Menards, whichever big box store you have in your area, they sell little concrete blocks. They're about maybe 1.5 inch square block, and they have wire built into them that you can put underneath your reinforcement material, and then you tie that little wire around it and it holds it in place, keeps it from coming out. But if you don't do that, you're in there standing on the reinforcement stuff as you're pouring, you're not going to be able to pull that up into the concrete. I've seen people try it. It just doesn't work. So do it the right way. Put something underneath it to hold it up, and then the concrete gets down underneath, and the wires in the middle of the concrete. Now, you can use rebar for this too. It's a little more expensive unless you have a source to get it free. Make sure if you do rebar that you go both directions, because if you only go one direction with your rebar, you still got a chance of your slab cracking in between where you have the rebar. So that's why you got to go both ways. And I usually get like a heavy gauge wire, and I'll tie the rebar together in the intersections to hold it together. But if you have a footing, if you're building something and you want a good footing on the edges, make sure you lay some rebar in the bottom of that footing as well. Should tell you, if you don't know what a footing is, right along the edges, it's like an 8 to 12 inch wide trench on the inside of the dimension of the slab that goes deeper. So you have a deeper section of the slab all the way around the perimeter, which helps keeping it from cracking and keeping everything stable. But we just did a flat slab here. Now, there's a lot more to finished concrete work. I'm not a professional concrete contractor or whatever, but I know the basics, and the basics get me by. There's a lot more stuff that you can do as far as finish work and stuff like that. Like after you screed the concrete out, you need to come in with some kind of, we used to call them tampers, but they make even rollers now that are a mesh material. And what you're trying to do is get the rocks to go down into the concrete further to where you just have the cream of the concrete on top. Kind of like you let cream rise to the top of milk. It's kind of the same process. But you want that nice cream on the top if you're going to do a real nice finish, or if you're going to do some stamping or whatever. You don't want those rocks getting in the way. Make sure you run around with your edger early on to knock the rocks down along the edge of the form. That way, when you do your final edging, those rocks aren't in the way, and it's a lot easier to run your final edge path around. And then if you're troweling, make sure you don't do your floating or your troweling too early. You're going to move the cream around on the top. You want that to set just a little bit before you start working that stuff, and if you're going to get it real smooth. So don't get in there too early with your float and your trowel and stuff. Let it go just a little bit, and don't disrupt that cream off the top, because that's what gives you your good finish. Now, if you got a big long slab, you need to put expansion joints in it. They make a piece that goes on your bowl float. A bowl float is just basically a big wide metal plank on a pole that you push across, and it just kind of floats your concrete around and smooths it out. But if you're a narrow slab like this one here, you can just screed it. You don't really need to bowl float it per se. But it's just a groover. It puts grooves at certain whatever interval you want in your concrete. And if your concrete's going to crack, it'll crack on that groove because that's the weaker point, because there's actually groove there. And it won't crack where you don't want it to crack. So, like I said, there's more stuff to it. Your concrete, you don't want it to set up too quick. So on a hot day, make sure you're getting the stuff done because it's going to set up on you a lot quicker. The guy, when he brings the truck out, can add water to the mix. So if the mix is too stiff, if it like stands up on its own and piles, that's a little stiff. So have him add some water to the mix to where it'll want to lay down a little bit and not just stand up like a cow pie or something like that. Let it flow just a little bit. So think about those things. If you're pumping like to the backyard of your house and your truck can't get back there, I highly recommend have a guy come out with a pump. And I'm not talking about those big crazy crane looking pumps. You can get just a standard pump that sits on the ground. There's no boom, and they just run a hose into your backyard. And I'll tell you what, it's a lot better than wheelbarrow. And if it costs you $300, that's money well spent. But also keep in mind, if you're using a pump, you have to get a certain size aggregate in your concrete. So let your concrete supplier know that you're going to use a pump, so they make sure to put the right size in your mix. So that's all we're going to cover on the concrete. If you got any questions, feel free to question or comment on the video. That also helps the algorithm, helps us get to more people. We don't do this for a living, of course, like I've told you before, but it does help us get to more people. So give us a thumbs up if you like our content, and share it with your like-minded friends. So check out Mark Kelly Farms on Facebook, and come back for our next installment on the chicken coop. If you want to see the next videos, we will be posting them pretty soon. So if you subscribe, you'll get the alert. Hit the little bell thing too. It'll let you know when that next video comes out if you want to follow along. If you're going to be doing a project somewhere in the future, we're going to be covering basic framing and roofing and doing windows and doors and stuff like that. So come on back and see us. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy. We love you guys. Bye-bye.